Hey there, lovely people. Today, I found a new story for you.
Heart-stopping discovery leaves a wife questioning everything, tampons, secret visits, and lies unravel a web of betrayal right under her nose. I'm 35, my husband is 37, and we've been together for 9 years, married for 5. Until recently, I thought we had a solid, happy marriage. We've got a beautiful 5-year-old daughter, and life was moving along just fine. But about a month ago, something happened that flipped my world upside down, and I can't stop thinking about it. It started on what seemed like a regular day. I was buckling our daughter into her car seat in my husband's car. She was fidgeting, so I reached under the seat to make sure the strap wasn't stuck on anything. That's when I felt it, a plastic wrapper. I pulled it out, and it was a tampon. At first, I was confused. I stared at it for a second, processing. It wasn't mine. I don't even use tampons. I've had an IUD for years and haven't had a period since. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation, but my chest started to tighten. I turned to my husband, holding up the wrapper, and said, "What's this?" He glanced at it without missing a beat and said, "Oh, that must be Jessica's. She probably dropped it when we went to lunch." Jessica is one of his colleagues. I've heard him mention her in passing a few times. They work in the same department, and from what I know, they get along well. He's never given me any reason to think there was anything more than work between them, but something about the way he said it, so casually like it was no big deal, made my stomach twist. I pressed him a bit, trying to act calm. "When did you go to lunch with Jessica?" I asked. He shrugged and said, "A couple of weeks ago, I think. She needed a ride, so I drove." Here's the thing, my husband has always been pretty trustworthy. He's never been secretive about his phone or where he goes. But this explanation felt off. For one, I know Jessica is married too. Why would she need a ride from him? And even if she did, how does a grown woman accidentally lose a tampon in someone else's car? It wasn't just the explanation that bothered me. It was the tone, like this was the most normal thing in the world, and I was silly for even questioning it. I didn't push it further at that moment. I didn't want to start an argument in front of our daughter, and honestly, I didn't know what to say. But all day, the thought gnawed at me. I kept trying to come up with innocent reasons why someone else's tampon would be in his car, but nothing added up. That night, I brought it up again. I waited until our daughter was asleep, and I asked him straight out, "Are you sure it's Jessica's? How does something like that even happen?" He sighed, clearly annoyed, and said, "I don't know. Maybe it fell out of her purse. What's the big deal?" That response sent me spiraling. I didn't know whether to feel hurt, suspicious, or just plain crazy. It's not like a tampon is incriminating evidence on its own, but it felt symbolic of something deeper, something I couldn't put my finger on. I started overthinking everything. Had he been acting differently lately? Was he working late more often? Was I just being paranoid? I hated the way it made me feel, like some insecure wife snooping for problems. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. The thing is, I don't want to jump to conclusions. We've been together for so long, and up until now, I never doubted his loyalty. But this tampon, it feels like a crack in the foundation, and I'm scared of what I'll find if I start looking closer. Am I crazy for thinking this is a red flag? Or am I reading too much into something small and innocent? I don't know what to do. Jessica and her husband, Tom, have been our friends for a while now. We hang out often. Our kids play together, we share stories about work, and honestly, it's always been easy and natural. That's why, after finding the tampon in my husband's car, I really tried to push the whole thing out of my mind. It didn't feel fair to suspect something shady when Jessica and I were on such friendly terms. But even as I told myself to let it go, my husband's reaction kept bothering me. He never apologized or tried to explain himself beyond that half-hearted, "It must be Jessica's" line. If anything, he acted like I was blowing things out of proportion. The way he dismissed it so casually made me feel like I was the crazy one for even questioning it. I don't know, maybe I was? But at the same time, how could I not question it? To put my mind at ease, I decided to keep my eyes open without making a big deal of it. I didn't want to come across as paranoid. especially since there wasn't any hard evidence. And honestly, I didn't want to create tension in our marriage or my friendship with Jessica if it was all just some innocent misunderstanding. A couple of weeks later, we had a little get-together at our house. Jessica, Tom, and their daughter came over for dinner. The kids ran around the backyard while the adults sat in the kitchen, catching up over wine. Everything felt normal. Laughs, light conversation, the usual stuff. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop replaying the tampon incident. It was like a splinter stuck in my brain, irritating me no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. At some point, Jessica and I were alone in the kitchen. The guys were outside manning the grill, and the kids were still playing. It was the perfect opportunity to test something that had been nagging at me since I found that tampon. I glanced at her purse sitting on the counter and then turned to her with what I hoped was a casual smile. "Hey, Jessica, do you have a tampon I could borrow?" I totally forgot to restock my bag, and of course, I need one now. Jessica, bless her, didn't hesitate. She reached into her purse, rummaging around for a second before pulling out a tampon. She handed it to me with a small laugh. "Here you go. Happens to me all the time." I took it and froze. It was the same brand, the same packaging as the one I'd found in my husband's car. My heart sank for a split second before I forced myself to smile and thank her. It felt like the air in the room got heavier, like something was closing in around me. I told myself this was good. It had to be a coincidence, right? I mean, what were the chances that she had the exact same brand and type as the tampon I'd found? Maybe it really was hers, and I was just letting my imagination run wild. After all, people have preferences when it comes to this stuff, and maybe she's used this brand for years. Still, as much as I tried to rationalize it, the whole situation left a bad taste in my mouth. I wanted to believe my husband's story, but something about it felt too neat. Too convenient. Why hadn't he just told me sooner that he gave Jessica a ride? Why had he brushed it off like it was no big deal, knowing how weird it looked? After that night, I decided to put it to rest, at least for now. I couldn't keep second-guessing myself or making things up in my head. If I didn't have solid proof of anything, then maybe it really was just an innocent mistake. But even as I told myself to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. And that feeling, it wouldn't stay buried for long. Just when I thought I had convinced myself to move on, everything came crashing down again. A few weeks after the dinner with Jessica and her family, I was putting away laundry in my room. It was a routine, mindless task, folding clothes, sorting socks, organizing drawers. But as I slid my underwear drawer closed, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a misplaced item, maybe some packaging from something I'd forgotten about. But when I reached in and pulled it out, my blood ran cold. It was another tampon. Same brand, same packaging. My heart started racing. I stared at it, my mind going in 1,000 different directions. I don't keep tampons in the house. I don't need them. I've had an IUD for years, and even before that, I never used this brand. So how the hell did this end up in my underwear drawer? The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in on me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the tampon in my trembling hand, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of joke? An accident? Or was it something worse? The odds of finding one tampon in my husband's car and another in my drawer felt astronomical. Once is a coincidence, maybe. Twice. It felt like a pattern, and it scared the hell out of me. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to confront my husband right then and there, but my thoughts were so jumbled, I didn't even know where to start. The idea of having that conversation, of him brushing me off again, or worse, finding a way to make me doubt myself, made me feel sick. Instead, I called my sister, Amanda. She's always been my rock, the person I go to when I need someone to tell me the truth, no matter how hard it is to hear. I explained everything, finding the first tampon in the car, asking Jessica for one, and now this. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, before she finally spoke. Okay, first of all, this is not normal. You know that, right? It's too much to be a coincidence. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I know, but what am I supposed to think? That Jessica is planting tampons around me? Why would she do that? Amanda's voice softened, but there was still an edge of concern. It could be her. Maybe she's trying to mess with you for some reason. Or she hesitated. It could be something worse. I'm sorry, but you need to consider that. My stomach twisted at her words. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I knew what she meant. She was talking about my husband, about the possibility that he wasn't being honest with me, that there was more to this than just some strange mix-up. I don't want to jump to conclusions, I said weakly. I don't even have proof that anything's going on. What if I confront him and it's nothing? Amanda sighed. You're not crazy for being upset. Something isn't right and you know it. If it were me, I'd want to get to the bottom of it before it eats me alive. Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. She was right. This wasn't normal, and pretending everything was fine wasn't going to make the unease go away. But the thought of digging deeper terrified me. What if I found something I couldn't unsee? What if I uncovered a truth I wasn't ready to face? That night, as I lay in bed next to my husband, I felt a distance between us that I couldn't ignore. He slept soundly, his breathing steady, while I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. I thought about all the times I'd trusted him, about the life we'd built together. And I thought about that tampon in my drawer, mocking me, daring me to ask the questions I didn't want to ask. I didn't know where this was going, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. A few weeks later, when I thought things couldn't possibly get any weirder, another incident sent me spiraling. It was a Tuesday, a pretty normal work day. I came home in the late afternoon, exhausted but ready to unwind. As I stepped into the living room, I spotted our youngest daughter. She's 3, playing on the floor with her toys. At first, it was a cute, ordinary scene. But then something about her outfit caught my attention. She was wearing a romper. Not just any romper, but a frilly, pastel-colored one with tiny embroidered flowers on the front. It looked expensive, fancy even, and she had a matching bow in her hair. The kind of picture-perfect Instagram outfit that you'd see on some influencer mom's kid. The problem? I never bought it. I've stopped dressing my kids in rompers for years now. They're adorable but totally impractical, especially for diaper changes. Besides, I always pick out my kids' clothes, and I know every single piece in their drawers. There's no way this outfit was from me. I stood there for a moment, just staring at her. Hey, sweetie, I said, trying to sound casual. Where did you get that outfit? She just giggled and kept playing, not paying much attention. I turned to my husband, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone like nothing was out of the ordinary. Where did this outfit come from? I asked, holding up the hem of the romper to show him. He glanced up briefly, barely interested. I don't know. It's probably just something you bought and forgot about. His response made my skin prickle. I didn't buy this. I'd remember. And I definitely didn't get a matching bow. I waited for him to say something, anything, that might explain it. Instead, he just shrugged. Well, I didn't buy it. Maybe it was a gift from your mom or Amanda? No, I said, my voice a little sharper now. Mom hasn't sent anything in weeks, and Amanda would have told me if she bought something like this. Did someone come over today? He put his phone down and gave me a look that made my stomach drop. No one came over, he said firmly. Why would you even ask that? I could feel the tension rising in my chest. Because this outfit didn't just appear out of thin air. Someone must have brought it here. He rolled his eyes, like I was being ridiculous. It's just a piece of clothing, not a big deal. Maybe you forgot where it came from. It happens. The way he dismissed me so easily made my blood boil. But I didn't want to start an argument in front of the kids, so I bit my tongue. Still, as I watched our daughter toddle around in that unfamiliar romper, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Something about this whole situation felt off. My husband never buys the kids' clothes, ever. He barely notices what they wear unless I point it out, and he definitely wouldn't bother with something so impractical, let alone accessories like a bow. And if no one had been at the house, then where had it come from? That night, after the kids were asleep, I brought it up again. I didn't want to let it go. Listen, I said, standing in the kitchen while he leaned against the counter, looking annoyed. This isn't just about a piece of clothing. I know I didn't buy it, and I know no one in my family did either. If someone came over while I was at work, just tell me. I'm not mad. I just want to know. I already told you, he said, his tone sharper now. No one came over. I don't know where the outfit came from. Maybe it's been here for weeks and you didn't notice. That's impossible, I said. I know every piece of clothing in this house. I'd notice. He threw his hands up in frustration. What do you want me to say, huh? You're making a huge deal out of nothing. I stared at him, feeling that now familiar knot in my stomach. The same feeling I'd had when I found the tampons. The same feeling I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. That night, as I lay in bed next to him, I couldn't stop replaying the events in my head. If no one had been at the house, how did that outfit get here? And if someone had been here, why wouldn't he just admit it? I didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was becoming painfully clear. The cracks in my trust were growing deeper. And this time, I wasn't sure I could ignore them. After the romper incident, I couldn't take the uneasy feeling anymore. Something wasn't right, and I needed answers. My husband had been dismissing my concerns for weeks now, brushing me off and acting like I was overreacting. But I knew deep down that I wasn't imagining things. Between the tampons, the strange clothes, and his evasive behavior, I couldn't ignore the growing pile of red flags. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I ordered a set of hidden cameras online, nothing too fancy, just enough to cover the main areas of the house. I felt a little guilty, like I was crossing a line, but at this point, I didn't care. I needed to know what was happening when I wasn't home, and if my husband wasn't going to tell me, I'd find out myself. The cameras wouldn't arrive for a few days, so I tried to act normal in the meantime. Every time I left for work, I felt a pit in my stomach, wondering what might be happening while I was gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something, or someone, I wasn't seeing. Then, before I even had the chance to install the cameras, I got my answer. It was a random weekday afternoon, and I was on a break at work. My phone buzzed with a notification from our doorbell camera. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a package delivery, but something made me check. When I opened the app, my stomach dropped. The video showed a woman walking into our house, holding our youngest daughter by the hand. She was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, but there was something about her that immediately struck me as familiar. My husband followed close behind, holding our oldest daughter. They looked comfortable, like this was completely normal. I replayed the video, my fingers trembling as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. And then it hit me. The woman was Linda, my husband's sister. I hadn't seen Linda in over 6 years. She and my husband had a falling out before we even got married, and as far as I knew, they hadn't spoken since. The details were always vague, some kind of family drama that neither of them wanted to elaborate on. But I'd never expected to see her casually walking into our house like nothing had ever happened. My heart was racing. Why was Linda here? Why hadn't my husband told me she was back in his life? And why did she look so comfortable with our daughters, like she'd been a part of their lives this whole time? I couldn't focus for the rest of the day. As soon as I got home, I tried to act normal, but my mind was spinning. I watched my husband closely, looking for any sign that he might say something, an explanation, an offhand comment, anything. But he didn't. He acted like it was just another ordinary day. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. After we put the kids to bed, I confronted him. I got a notification from the doorbell camera today, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up from his phone, his expression neutral. Oh yeah? What about? I stared at him, waiting for him to come clean. When he didn't, I pressed on. I saw Linda. For a moment, his face froze, like he hadn't expected me to say her name. Then he recovered quickly, setting his phone down and leaning back in his chair. Yeah, she came by today. I was going to tell you. When? I asked, my voice rising. When were you planning on telling me that your sister, who you haven't spoken to in years, just showed up out of nowhere, and that she's apparently been spending time with our daughters? He sighed, like I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. It's not a big deal. She reached out a few months ago, and we've been working on mending things. I didn't want to bring it up until I knew it was going somewhere. A few months? I repeated, stunned. You've been seeing her for months and didn't think to tell me? And you've been letting her around our kids without even mentioning it to me? She's their aunt, he said defensively. Why wouldn't I let her see them? You're acting like this is some kind of betrayal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just about Linda. It was about the lies, the secrecy, the way he'd been shutting me out. You've been hiding this from me. What else are you keeping from me? He rolled his eyes. Nothing. You're blowing this way out of proportion. But I didn't believe him. Not anymore. The tampon in the car. The one in my drawer. The mystery romper. And now Linda, showing up out of nowhere like she'd been here all along. The pieces didn't fit, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt like there was something bigger, something he wasn't telling me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My husband acted like everything was fine, but I felt like my whole world was shifting under my feet. The person I thought I knew, the life I thought we had, it all felt like a lie. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out the truth. But I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't get the image of Linda walking into our home out of my head. The casual way she held our youngest daughter's hand, the way my husband followed her inside like it was completely normal, it all felt wrong. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't add up. Why had she suddenly come back into his life? And why had he gone to such great lengths to keep it a secret from me? I decided I needed answers. Since my husband wasn't offering them willingly, I started digging. I checked our shared calendar, texted his parents to casually ask about when they last saw the kids, and even flipped through his phone when he left it unattended on the counter. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, evidence that my husband and Linda had been meeting behind my back for months. There were texts between them, dozens of them, about catching up and working things out. What shocked me most was how many of those meetings had taken place in our house. I couldn't believe it. While I was at work, Linda had been spending time in my home, playing with my children, and acting like part of the family. I confronted him again, this time with the messages as proof. How long has Linda been coming to our house? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but failing miserably. His face fell, but only for a second. Then he put on that same defensive expression I'd seen so many times before. I told you we've been trying to rebuild things. I didn't think it was a big deal. You didn't think it was a big deal to have your sister, who, by the way, has a history of drug use and violence, around our kids without telling me? I snapped. And in our house, behind my back. She's changed, he said, his voice rising. She's trying to fix herself, and I wanted to give her a chance. What was I supposed to do? Just shut her out forever? Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. If it was so innocent, why lie about it? He hesitated, and for the first time, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. I didn't think you'd understand, he admitted finally. You've always been cautious about Linda. I didn't want to deal with the fight. I stared at him, barely able to process what he was saying. You didn't want to deal with the fight, so you just lied to me? Let her into our home. Let her spend time with our kids, without even giving me a say in the matter? It wasn't like that, he said quickly. She's their aunt. She bought them clothes, toys. She's been trying to be a good influence. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. Wait, I said slowly. She bought the romper, didn't she? The one I found on our daughter. He didn't answer, but the look on his face said it all. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. She's been buying them clothes and spending the night here, hasn't she? I demanded. His eyes widened slightly, and I knew I'd hit the mark. Has she stayed in our bedroom? I asked, my voice shaking. He rubbed his temples like he was the one who was exhausted by all of this. Once or twice, he admitted. She didn't have anywhere else to go. I took the kids to my parents so you wouldn't find out. You lied to me, I interrupted, my voice trembling with anger. You let her sleep in our bed and then lied about where you were taking the kids? It's not what you think, he said quickly. Nothing happened. She just needed a place to stay for a night or two while she sorted things out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Do you have any idea how this looks? How it feels to know that you've been sneaking her into our home, into our bedroom, and lying to my face about it? She's family, he said, like that excused everything. I didn't want to make things harder than they needed to be. Harder for who? Certainly not me. I couldn't even put into words the betrayal I felt. This wasn't just about Linda. It was about him, the man I'd trusted for years, going behind my back and making decisions that affected our family without me. And yet, the more he spoke, the more I felt like there was still something he wasn't telling me. Why go to such lengths to hide this? Why lie about taking the kids to his parents? Why not tell me when Linda first reached out? As I stared at him, waiting for him to say something, anything, that might make this make sense, a horrifying thought crossed my mind. What if Linda wasn't the only one hiding something? What if my husband was hiding something too? I didn't want to believe it, but the doubt was already there, growing and spreading like a shadow I couldn't ignore. And as much as I wanted to trust him, I knew that trust was no longer an option. I had to find out the truth, even if it shattered everything. I thought I was prepared when I finally decided to confront my husband, but nothing could have prepared me for how he responded. I waited until the kids were asleep, every nerve in my body on edge as I replayed everything I knew. The tampons, the romper, the doorbell footage, the nights Linda spent here while I was none the wiser. I sat him down in the living room, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "We need to talk," I said. He gave me an exasperated sigh, already defensive. "What now?" "Don't do that," I said sharply. "Don't act like I'm the one causing problems here. I've caught you in lie after lie, and I'm done pretending everything is fine." His face hardened, but he stayed quiet, waiting for me to continue. I pulled out my phone and opened the doorbell camera app. "You didn't tell me Linda was back in your life. You didn't tell me she was coming into our home. You didn't tell me she was staying in our bedroom. And yet, I have this," I said, holding the phone up to show him the footage of Linda walking into the house. He barely glanced at it before leaning back in his chair with a scoff. "So what?" "I told you she's trying to fix things. I didn't think it was worth upsetting you over. You didn't think it was worth telling me that someone with a history of drug abuse and violence was spending time with our kids? Are you serious?" "She's their aunt," he snapped. "She's family, and she's trying to change. You're the one blowing this out of proportion." My heart pounded as I stared at him, anger rising with every word he said. "Blowing it out of proportion? You lied to me, over and over again. You hid this from me for months. How am I supposed to trust anything you say after this?" He rolled his eyes, his tone shifting into something condescending. "You're tired," he said. "You've been stressed with work, with the kids. I get it. But you're making this into something it's not. You're letting your imagination run wild." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously trying to convince me that I'm imagining this? That I'm too tired to know what's going on in my own house?" "I'm just saying you've been on edge lately," he said, his voice infuriatingly calm. "You've been acting paranoid, seeing problems where there aren't any. Maybe you need to talk to someone about it." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. Was he actually trying to make me think I was crazy? I stood up, shaking with anger. "Don't you dare gaslight me," I said through gritted teeth. "I'm not imagining the tampons I found. I'm not imagining the romper on our daughter or the footage of Linda walking into our house. And I'm sure as hell not imagining the lies you've been telling me. Tampons? Clothes? You're seriously making a federal case out of this?" he said, throwing his hands up. "This is what I mean. You're obsessing over things that don't matter." "They do matter," I shouted, "because they're part of a pattern. You've been hiding things from me for months, and now you're trying to make me feel crazy for noticing. Do you even hear yourself?" For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his jaw clenched, like he was trying to decide his next move. Then he stood up, towering over me. "You need to let this go," he said quietly but firmly. "Linda's not a threat. She's trying to rebuild her life, and I'm not going to cut her out just because you can't handle it. I won't apologize for helping my sister." I was speechless. He was so calm, so self-assured, like I was the unreasonable one for being upset. But no matter how convincing he sounded, I couldn't ignore the mountain of evidence staring me in the face. The doorbell footage, the tampons, the lies, the romper, and the gut-wrenching feeling that there was still more he wasn't telling me. "I don't think you understand how serious this is," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't just about Linda. This is about you lying to me, over and over again, and making me feel like I'm crazy for noticing. He shook his head, looking frustrated. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said again. "You need to stop." But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Not until I got the truth. That night, as he went to bed without another word, I stayed up in the living room, replaying the footage and rereading his texts with Linda. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I didn't know what was worse, the lies he'd already told me or the possibility that there were still more waiting to be uncovered. One thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Filing for divorce wasn't something I ever imagined I'd have to do, but after everything that had happened, I didn't see another choice. My husband had broken my trust in ways I couldn't repair, and his constant lies and manipulation left me feeling like I was living with a stranger. Every attempt to get the truth out of him was met with gaslighting or outright denial, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, for myself or for my kids. The day I contacted a lawyer, I sat in the car for almost an hour before making the call. My hands were shaking, and I kept second-guessing myself. Was I overreacting? Was I really ready to take this step? But then I thought about the tampons I'd found, the hidden visits with Linda, and the lies that just kept piling up. I thought about how he had made me feel crazy for questioning any of it, how he had dismissed my concerns like they were nothing. And I knew I couldn't live like that anymore. The legal process was grueling, more drawn out and emotionally draining than I ever could have anticipated. My lawyer was thorough, combing through every piece of evidence I had. The doorbell footage, the texts between him and Linda, the inconsistencies in his stories. It wasn't just about the tampons or the clothes anymore. It was about the bigger picture, about a man who had betrayed his wife and put his children in situations I wasn't comfortable with. My husband didn't take the news well. At first, he acted shocked, like he hadn't seen it coming, even though we'd been fighting for months. Then he turned angry, accusing me of blowing things out of proportion and ruining our family. He even had the audacity to say I was selfish for wanting to break up our marriage over something as small as a sister. But this wasn't just about Linda. It was about him lying to me, hiding things from me, and making decisions that affected our family without consulting me. It was about him gaslighting me and trying to make me feel like I was the problem. By the time we got to court, I felt like I barely recognized the man I'd married. The custody battle was the hardest part. I knew he loved our kids, but I couldn't ignore the fact that he'd lied about where they were and who they were spending time with. I couldn't trust him to put their safety first, and that terrified me. My lawyer argued that his actions showed a pattern of deceit and poor judgment, and thankfully, the court agreed. It took almost a year, but in the end, I was granted primary custody of our children. My husband was given supervised visitation rights, and even those felt like a risk. It was a bittersweet victory. While I was relieved to have legal protection for my kids, the reality of being a single mom was daunting. Telling the kids was the hardest conversation I've ever had. Our oldest, now 6, was old enough to understand that things were changing, though she didn't fully grasp why. I told her that Mommy and Daddy both loved her very much, but we needed to live in separate houses to keep everyone happy and safe. She cried, and I held her for what felt like hours, feeling like my heart was breaking into pieces. The first few months after the divorce were rough. I had to figure out how to balance work, parenting, and navigating a life I'd never expected to have. There were days I felt like I'd made the wrong decision, days when I missed the good moments we used to have as a family. But then I'd remember the lies, the betrayal, and the way he made me doubt my own sanity, and I knew I'd done the right thing. Linda disappeared from our lives after the divorce. Whether my husband kept in touch with her or not, I have no idea, and honestly, I don't care. My priority now is my kids, and making sure they grow up in a home where they feel safe and loved. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my instincts sooner. The signs were there all along, but I ignored them because I didn't want to believe that the man I loved could betray me like that. Filing for divorce was the hardest decision I've ever made, but it was also the most necessary. Now, it's just me and my kids, and while it's not the life I imagined for us, it's one where we can finally breathe again. We're building something new, something better, one day at a time.